the floor, I will introduce myself. Some of you know me already. My name's Caroline Elliott. I'm a teaching focused professor in the economics department at the University of Warwick. I'm also deputy head of department with responsibility for teaching and learning there, and I'm deputy director of the Economics Network. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to get my co-presenters to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go with alphabetical order this afternoon. So Fabio, could you go first, please?
Hello, it's Fabio Arico. I'm affiliated to the School of Economics of the University of East Anglia, but I'm currently on secondment as director of CHIRPS, which is our university center for higher education, practice, policy, and scholarship. And I'm a professor of higher education and economics and an NTF.
Thank you, Fabio. Apologies, I should have mentioned I am a PFHEA. That's probably a huge admission. Okay, thank you, Fabio. Parama.
Hi, everyone. Parama Chaudhury. I'm professor teaching in economics at UCL. I'm also Vice Provost Education at UCL. And like Caroline, I'm a PFHEA as well.
Thank you. And Ross?
Hello, my name's Ros O'Leary, and I've got a long history of working with the Economics Network. But I work centrally at the University of Bristol. I'm a Principal Fellow and a National Teaching Fellow, and I run the schemes here at Bristol.
Thank you, Ross. So Ashley, a lot of you will know Ashley. Ashley's looking after all of us this afternoon. Ashley, do you want to say hello as well?
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm the Centre Manager at the Economics Network.
Thank you. So the order of this afternoon is that Ros is going to speak first, and as somebody who is a National Teaching Fellow and a PFHEA, she's going to give an overview of both of the schemes and the opportunities. Fabio is an NTF, so he's then going to give an overview of the National Teaching Fellowship Scheme, and then myself and Parama are going to talk about the Principal Fellowship Scheme. There'll then be an opportunity to move into breakout rooms depending on which you're most interested in, NTF or PFHEA, and we can answer all of your individual questions there, and then we will come back for a wrapping up session and to answer any final last questions from everybody at the end. So I hope that sounds okay. So without further ado, Ros, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, Ash, are you sharing the slides?
I can do, but if it's easier for you to do it then and go through them, why don't you go for it?
Oh,
whatever's easiest.
Oh no, you do it, because now
Okay.
I haven't got the right ones. So
Okay, fine.
yeah, sorry, I was just clarifying like how to move them on.
No worries.
So brilliant, thanks so much. Well, I guess this is all about encouraging you as economists to go for one of these, Principal Fellowship and National Teaching Fellowship, and encourage you in terms of, you know, what this involves and how we might support you. So I'm going to kick off with, you know, what's the difference between Principal Fellowship and National Teaching Fellowship? So if we go to the next slide, what are they and what's the difference? So I would describe Principal Fellowship as the focus here really is on strategic impact and what the latest guidance from Advanced HE is saying about this. Because both of these awards are run through Advanced HE, is you've really got to demonstrate extensive impact. So this is about your sustained contribution to strategic level things, all to do with teaching and learning. So the emphasis is very much sustained strategic leadership and extensive impact. National Teaching Fellowship, this is phrased as outstanding impact on student outcomes and the teaching profession. So similar, but not quite the same. And I don't know whether this metaphor is helpful to you, but if we go to the next slide. Oh,
No, I've gone too far.
oh, there we go. Sometimes I think of this as, you know, principal fellowship is the football chairperson. So you're really quite removed from the teaching and learning of students. It's all about strategy. And National Teaching Fellowship, you can quite often think of this as somebody being a star player. It's star player plus, right? So you might be fantastic in the classroom, but you've got to do some other things as well in terms of, you know, reaching others, and yeah, your reach and impact and influence has to be beyond yourself and your own teaching. But that is helpful to me in terms of characterizing what the main differences are. I've got another slide coming up, Ash, the next one. And other differences, principal fellowship is really a reflective account, and it's connected to the professional standards framework. I'm hoping that most people have heard of the professional standards framework, and it's just been newly updated. It's a framework for teaching in higher education, and it's pretty straightforward and common sense, and it has areas of activity and knowledge and values that we could probably all subscribe to very easily. It talks about having professionalism and expertise in designing, teaching, assessment and feedback, etc. So principal fellowship is awarded by merit, so you just have to pass the bar in terms of your extensive impact and strategic leadership. It's run by Advanced HE, and last year there was around 1,500 principal fellows. Scheme was introduced in 2011. What I would say is you may or may not have an internal accredited scheme for principal fellowship. Some institutions do. I know Caroline's does and Parama's too. But other people will find that they will need to apply directly to Advanced HE. And I'm going to this in a minute talk about what that looks like in terms of that direct application, although there'll be similarities. National Teaching Fellowship, rather, it's not necessarily such a reflective account. It's an account of your impact. It's competitive. It's been going on for 21 years as a national award, and each university can nominate up to 3 members of staff. You typically find it's a competitive process within your institution to go forward, and 55 individuals get awarded a National Teaching Fellowship each year. Wonderful. Thank you. And then the thing I wanted to mention, in case you've not heard of it, there's another award, the sister award to National Teaching Fellowships, and it's a team award. It's called a Collaborative Award for Teaching Excellence, again run through Advanced HE. Each institution can put forward 1 team, and only 15 teams are recognised each year. But don't forget about that one as well. That might be a good one for economists to go for collaboratively. Okay, so I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into principal fellowship, and as mentioned, I'm going to focus on direct applications when I get to the criteria, but your institutional schemes will be reflecting the same kind of criteria. So I think it's still going to be helpful. So as I mentioned, it's all about strategic leadership and extensive impact. Now, typically this would be across an institution and beyond, but it could also be across a discipline. And if you find yourself in a very large institution, you can lay out your case that you're looking after a faculty and have some kind of faculty strategic role. You can argue that that is equal to the size of a smaller university. So take heart, you're not exempt from this process. What it is not is not necessarily the next thing to do after senior fellowship, because it and it's not necessarily based on your job title either. So you could be doing some wonderful things, but which are not reflected in terms of strategic leadership, that are not reflected in your job title. And it's not an annotated CV. I'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like in a minute. I've only got a few more slides to go. So if I go to the next slide, the direct application comprises three things. There's a 500-word context and leadership statement. This isn't assessed, but it allows reviewers to see, you know, what is your context and your approach to leadership. There's a record of strategic educational impact, and I'll show you an example with the next slide. I'll show you what that means. Oh, not yet though. Sorry, Ash. And the new style principal fellowship, which they've just launched, is based on case studies, which seems to be an improvement on what we had previously. So 3 or 4 case studies, overall word count of 7,000 words. You also need 3 references or 3 advocate statements. So I am on to the next slide now. Wonderful. So this is a record of educational impact, and here's some examples of what you might include in that. So the advice is you can have up to 10 entries, up to 25 words each. So here you are describing your engagement. Here are some examples. So university lead on embedding authentic assessment. So you can imagine that if you're working within the discipline, number 2 might accord with you. Invited member of curriculum redesign working group for professional body, those kinds of things. So that's just to give you an idea of what you might have in there. Think of that as a good place to start in your principal fellowship application. You might think of all the things that you've done and have a brainstorm and think of what kind of themed strategic leadership activities have you been undertaking that you might include in this. Okay, so what are the criteria? And that's my next slide. 3 criteria. This is for your 7,000 word reflective account of practice. And here you're going to have to show your sustained and effective strategic leadership. So within an institution or across a discipline, and the emphasis is on extensive impact. Number 2 is about how you develop and implement effective and inclusive. So inclusive is a new word that's popped up here in Principal Fellowship. So here it's what your input has been, or how you've led on strategies or policies or initiatives that have had an impact on student learning. And finally, the 3rd criteria is all around the dimensions of the professional standards framework, which I mentioned before. So you have to demonstrate your active commitment to all of the dimensions, and there are now, in the new professional standards framework, there are now 15, and that is like a golden thread throughout your reflective account. Now, before we move on to National Teaching Fellowship, I've got a couple more slides. Now, a word about the reflective account. So it's not just description, it's not a big long list of the fabulous things that you've done. What is expected here is some reflection. So what did you do and why did you do it? And an emphasis on your inclusive approach to what you did and why you did it. And then really importantly, what was the impact? So you are going to have to provide some evidence of your extensive impact. So that might include, and I think we got a slide coming up a bit later about what that might include, but that definitely will include some numbers, some quantitative evidence but also maybe a very few testimonials, not expected to have a lot in a principal fellowship application. You'll also be expected to talk about what you've learned and how your approach has been impacted from that case study. You're going to have to be really clear about your role in all of this. So if you had a particular role in an initiative, you need to spell that out, or make clear what you led and what you input to. I mean, there's recognition that a lot of these things are usually very collaborative, but for the reviewers, they'll need to know what your role was. Do locate your practice in literature. Not expected to do that a lot, but that will indicate your professionalism and will actually meet one of the dimensions of the professional standards framework, which is about scholarly, connecting to research as well, which connects to my last point, which is, demonstrating your commitment to the professional standards framework. So my last slide before we move on to Fabio, and I don't know, Caroline, whether you wanted to pause for any questions before we moved on, but my ultimate one is, if you're not sure, go and use Advanced HC's decision tool, and that will help you identify any gaps you've got, or whether actually maybe it's not quite right for you at this point.
Thank you, Ros. That was great. That was perfectly timed. So we've got about a minute. If there are any sort of quick, sort of urgent points of clarification, questions that people would like to raise.
Nothing urgent.
Okay. I'm guessing that you're all saving your questions for the breakout rooms, which is absolutely fine. So thank you very much, Ross. That was really helpful. And Fabio, over to you for more on the MTF scheme.
Just waiting for the slides to be on. There you go. Excellent. Right. So like Ross, I'm actually in charge of overseeing some of the schemes in my institution, in my new role. And we just completed the submission of NTF candidates for this year. So each institution can nominate and put forward 3 NTF candidates and 1 collaborative award. I'm just going to post in the slides the link to the Advanced C resources. So a claim for a National Teaching Fellowship is divided in 3 main parts. In the first part, candidates have to explain why they are excellent, but excellent is going to be taken as the starting point. You also have to cater for, like, you have to carve your own individual profile and argue the case that you are unique in your specific niche and area. The second criterion is actually looking at how you are able to impact colleagues. So dissemination is essential, but you go beyond dissemination and you really generate an impact, a change in other people's practice and the way they teach as a result of your own good practice. And then in the third criterion, you have to demonstrate that you are engaged with the continuous professional development and analyze and reflect on how this continuous professional development is able to empower you to generate impact. And very often it's quite nice if you're actually able to demonstrate that your own development is actually feeding into other people's development as well. So there are some linkages with the criterion too. Generally, I don't know whether Ross will agree with that, but generally in different training sessions that I've been myself, it is believed that evidencing and writing criterion 3 is generally the most challenging of the 3 ones. So I just point attention immediately, like the writing number 3 is going to be possibly more challenging than the other 2. The rules and regulations change every year, but these criteria are generally there. Back in my days, there was a CV. Right now, what we have is a 300 words contextual statement, which basically you write to describe what is your role in your own institution, what you do, what are your functions. This particular statement is not assessed, but is very helpful for the referee to put your activities into context. And the idea is that they wanted to democratize the process and just making sure that you don't need to be senior in your career. If what you're doing is excellent, you can be a lecturer under probation, and that's absolutely fine, provided that you can actually evidence the criteria. So they're going to be able to relate that to the kind of context within which you operate. But just have in mind that obviously this is the first thing that referees are going to read. So even if it's not assessed, you just want to give a good impressions to begin with. Shall we move to the next slide, please? So all the three criteria that I was describing in the previous slide are going to be assessed on the basis of three dimensions that are all equally important. So the first one is the reach of your activities. To which extent are you able to generate an impact? Are you just working within your own classroom? Have you been able to generate practice within your own institution? Hopefully, and very likely, if you are an NTF level, your activities have an impact outside your institution as well. So the idea is like, how many individuals have you been able to affect with your practice, those being students, staff, or other stakeholders. But it's not just about reach, it's also the value of what you do. So which kind of activities have you conducted, and what is the value for the students? Is that something related to inclusivity? Is that something related to the way you engage the classroom? Or particular ways you assess the students? What is the benefit? Yeah, so that is going to be about value. Impact is one of the most important dimensions, and something that somebody that perhaps is at the beginning of the process needs some time to become acquainted with. So many colleagues actually, at the early draft of their application, focus on esteem. So I've been published, and my colleagues say that I'm great, the students say that I'm good, but that's not good enough. Impact is generating a change in other people. So which impact do you actually generate on the students? And possible way to evidence that is testimonials of students actually saying that they've gone out of uni and done great things thanks to your teaching, or colleagues that have actually not just said that you are a great presenter when you go to a conference, but they actually take home what you do and embed in their own practice. That is impact, So you generated a change into the people that you come in contact with. Next slide, please. So there is a huge amount of different types of evidence that you can discuss in your claim. So you can use KPIs indicator that are coming from student data, NSS, satisfaction scores. I'm always very wary about satisfaction scores, in my own humble opinion. But especially if you're able to demonstrate that there is some sort of link between your activities and some improvement at school level, at module level, at university level, in whatever you've done. But of course, other awards, other recognitions that you received, or even being published in pedagogical research, for instance, all counts against the evidence that you can use. But I can say a little bit more in the next slides, please. So we were presenting a lot of different sources that you can use, but we need to emphasize that an MTF application is not evidence-based. So there is not going to be a portfolio where you collect all this evidence and you need to present it to the referees. Your application is going to be evidence-informed. So in other words, you refer to the evidence, but you don't need to present the evidence. So don't worry about putting regression outputs on your NTF claim. You can produce tables, you can produce charts. You probably going to have a lot of quotes, and quotes are going to be testimonials given by your students, given by colleagues. So the institution for which you work are going to take on their hands the task of certifying that what you are saying is true. So aside with your claim, there is going to be an institutional statement, generally signed by the Vice Chancellor themselves, which validates that everything you said is actually grounded. The evidence is there. It's just that you're not going to put it within the application. Yeah. My suggestion is trying to provide different evidence and in different formats. I've seen it in feedback to application. Using a mix of qualitative and quantitative evidence is welcome. Evidence that is coming from external sources or sources that are the farthest away from you, of course, is very strong. It means that you actually reached out and impacted on colleagues that are not in your immediate reach. And that is going to have a lot of value, you know. So different stakeholders, different kind of evidence, but most certainly you really want to ensure that the student voice is embedded in your application is essential. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, the NTF process is competitive. So differently from a PFHEA, where, I mean, if you hit the criteria, you're going to be awarded a PFHEA. An NTF award is actually competitive. So every year, only 55 people are awarded this recognition. And that means that also the number of applications that can be sent by each institution is limited. So each institution can only send 3 applications per year. And each institution has got a Teaching Excellence Award lead appointed in agreement with Advanced HE. And they mediate the whole process. So you can even send your application on your own. It's going to be your TIL, in my case, me, submitting this on the Advanced HE website. So the first step that you want to take if you are interested in applying for this is actually ensuring that you know who the TIL is in your institution, approaching them, having a chat with them, and figuring out how is the internal process. Many institutions have formed internal community of practice. So for instance, the University of East Anglia has got a UTF community, which stands for University Teaching Fellowship Community. We recruit selectively, according to the greater scheme, we recruit selectively 3 candidates each year. And then we work with the pool of candidates and we decide which ones are going to be put forward in a particular year. And we vet application, we give feedback to them, and this has proven to be really, really productive and successful in generating successful NTFs awards. So it's not going to be a sprint, it's a marathon. From the point in time in which you decide that you are interested in applying for this, there is some work to do. And first of all, what you want to do is starting to collect as much evidence as possible and look back into other folders that you have on your computer. Everything that can be used as evidence in support of your claim, just put it all together. Make sure that you take a copy of everything people say about you that is nice. But then, of course, like any kind of process, like a job application, you just want to list what are the criteria on one side and build a very nice grid where you just match those criteria with your activities and conduct a gap analysis and just see what else you need to do in order to ensure that you hit all the criteria. Or you might be surprised and find out that you actually hit them all, but you need to organize the evidence accordingly. So you're going to have a list of criteria, you're going to have your activities, and then you have to reflect on reach, value, and impact for each of those. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. Writing the claim is quite an endeavor. There is no room for modesty. You must blow your own trumpet, and you must use the NTF buzzwords. You need to use an assertive and confident tone. So I always advise colleagues that are actually writing the claim to avoid any kind of negation, any kind of wording the semantic field of doubt. So there are no maybes, perhaps, possibly have done this. No, you must sell to the referee that you are the finished product. You are excellent, and there is nothing more than you need to do in order to claim what is yours. So of course, you don't want to be arrogant, but you want to be assertive. So it's not just good, it's excellent, outstanding, acclaimed, passionate, all those kind of big words, which of course then you have to back with evidence. And the word transforming is extremely important. So being transformative is one of the most important features of an NTF. You transform other people's life within the learning and teaching sphere. And by all means, you don't need to be published in pedagogical research. That's not a requirement. But what I really recommend is that you generate your own signature pedagogy. So being excellent is a starting point, and you need to be excellent at everything. No discussion about that. But on top of that, what is it that you are unique for? On top of that excellence, what is that the sector would recognize about your practice as a signature, as your own approach? And that, I think, is really, really important. And if you had the opportunity to create an acronym, a slogan, a way to package what you do through a brand, I think that's a very good way forward, which I tested with many candidates, and it does work. Avoid shopping lists. Is not the list of all the things that you do. Your excellence should be taken as granted. So yeah, you're great at everything. But what referees like to see is a nice coherent narrative that reflects and puts together all the particular features and nuances of your approach in a sort of fairy tale, you know, and actually it's quite a pleasant exercise, you know, reflecting on all this and telling your story, you know. So this is what you want to do when you actually structure your claim. A little bit more on writing your claim. Please have in mind that you're not going to be reviewed by other fellow economists. It's very unlikely. It is possible, but it's very unlikely. We are only possibly a dozen NTFs in economics against more than 1,000 awarded NTFs across all the years the program has been running. So we are underrepresented, and I really, really hope that some of you will apply, because we need more representation from our discipline. It's unacceptable that we are so little representing in this field. But reviewing is going to go all across the disciplines. So anybody might review your claims. So please make sure that you avoid the inner jokes, the inner lingo that we have within economics. So don't talk about Pareto improvements in what you do, or first best and second best, because these are not going to go down that well. I mean, we understand each other, but not outside not outside economics. So avoid that. And you really must exude passion about teaching in everything you say and write. I'll let you read the kind of feedback that I give my colleagues when I review draft codes. It really needs to be glowing. It really needs to be sparkly. And it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to do that on your own. It's very difficult to write about ourselves, blowing our own trumpet to that extent. But yeah, you do need angel singings, you need fireworks, and you also need unicorns doing what they do. Yes, find a critical friend. Your teal probably is going to be your critical friend, and your community, if you have one within your institution, can actually support you in writing that claim. And as I was saying, impact, and external sources, of course, are going to be stronger evidence than internal. Just to wrap up, can we move to the next slide? In my experience, in the experience of colleagues that I've seen going through, this is an amazing journey of this self-discovery. Everybody should write an NTF claim just for the sake of it. Of course, the downs is that there are elements of randomness, like when you send a paper for publication, the referee might just not get your value, even though you have one. I can share that I was successful in my second round. So I applied once, I wasn't successful. Then I went for the second round. I didn't change my application at all, and I went through. So it was just about match, possibly. But you need to set out your expectation, manage your expectation, and accept criticism from your colleagues, from your community, from your team, and from the reviewers as well. It's a process that takes work, but it is entirely worthwhile. It's career changing. So on a bad day, I actually go back and read my claim, and I actually feel proud of myself. And this is something that I would recommend to everybody. You should go through this process nevertheless. Very often, a recognition at NTF level is aligned to promotion to chair. I don't want to say that you're going to be given a chair. You will have to evidence those criteria within your institution. But an NTF is a fantastic business card for that. And of course, we are also going to be given the opportunity to join the community of National Teaching Fellowship. We have a symposium every year, and it's one of the craziest events I take part every year. I mean, like, people look like being on drugs for how excited and glowing they are when you go on those events. Is amazing. There is no consumption of illegal drug, I promise. But it's something to take part in. I would strongly recommend. And that's everything from me. I just pass it over to Caroline.
Thank you so much, Fabio. That was great. We've got one question in the chat from Dunley. Oh, I should also say I love the idea of a praise folder. That would be so nice. But anyway, we've got a question in the chat from Dunley, who is asking about what type of evidence you can use to evidence individual excellence.
Yeah. So it really varies depending what you do, because if you are working, for instance, with students with particular needs and you do something about inclusivity, it's going to be their testimonial. Or if you have a sufficiently large base, you could look at closing attainment gaps and see whether these students have actually improved their performance. In my case, I was working on generating confidence in students, and I was talking about correlation between attainment and confidence levels, and the fact that when students learn, their confidence level actually increases. But of course, once again, I could have brought in regression table. That's not something that you want to bring in there. So, just a very nice table where you show some numbers that everybody can understand is what they are after.
Okay. Thank you. Next question, I think, is one for Roz. So Peter has asked, to what extent can we use the same evidence for a principal fellowship and an NTF application?
Oh, well, again, it probably depends, but yeah, definitely you could take some of it, because it may be that you are in your NTF application, you might be talking about strategic leadership things, particularly in criterion 2. Where you go beyond your scale of influence. Well, I mean, that would pop up in criterion 1 as well. So where you're demonstrating that you're really strategically leading things and influencing other people's practice to benefit the learning experience, there's definitely a crossover, and there's definitely I think there was a bit of a gap between me doing NTF and principal fellowship, and it did look a little bit different, but there were a few little bits that I did take from my NTF into my principal fellowship. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Ross, for that answer. So we'll move on now to look at principal fellowship applications. So Ashley, if we could move back to the slides, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. So, and if you hit return again, that would be great. So the link on the slide is to the professional standards framework. And just to take a little step back to provide a bit of context, Roz obviously has talked about principal fellowship, and she's mentioned senior fellowship. So I just thought I would start by saying there are actually 4 levels of fellowship. So there's the level which is associate fellow, and that's for colleagues very early in their teaching career. So often it will be PhD students who teach who will get associate fellowship level. And then fellowship level, this is where academics have to evidence their good quality teaching, learning and assessment. And the focus is on the individual and how they can demonstrate their excellence. Then for senior fellowship, I always think of senior fellowship as being a way in which academics demonstrate not just their own excellence, but the impact that they've had on others. And then principal fellowship is where you're demonstrating this impact beyond the department, maybe at faculty, institutional or national level, and it's focusing on strategies and policies. Okay, Ashley. So Ros has already said there are 3 aspects to what's called Descriptor 4. And Descriptor 4 is Principal Fellowship applications. And those 3 aspects cover the 15 dimensions, which Ros has already mentioned. These are broken down into 3 categories, which are professional values, core knowledge, and areas of activity. And so if you speak to anyone who's gone for either associate fellowship, senior fellowship, or principal fellowship, they will always talk about the A's, the K's, and the V's, because we've all written applications where we have to work through the application thinking, okay, have we covered all the V's, all the K's, all the A's? Have we done that multiple times? So so that's a bit of an in-joke that everybody refers to the V's and the K's and the A's. Okay, so Ros said you don't have to think about principal fellowship as simply the next stage following on from becoming a senior fellow. That's absolutely right. However, I did apply and get senior fellowship first, and then having got it, and then thought I was at a different stage of my career, which I must have demonstrated because I got principal fellowship. Having got senior fellowship, I thought I'd go on to write principal fellowship. And I had a really rude awakening. And Parama, you can say later whether you agree with this or not. I did my senior fellowship application and I loved it. And I recommend to all my colleagues now that they apply for senior fellowship. It was great. I literally did what's in the picture here. I divided up my application into 5 sections, including the case studies. I lit a scented candle and I wrote, and I had 5 half days with a scented candle, just writing, reflecting on what I'd done and the impact I'd had on others to improve teaching, learning and assessment. And it was great. I loved the whole experience. And then I thought, okay, a few years later on, I would apply for principal fellowship. And oh my goodness, suddenly, having thought I would be back in this warm, lovely, reflective world, thinking about what I'd achieved, it felt so cold, the principal fellowship application, because it was very much, what have you done? What have you done in managerial roles? What are the policies you've adopted? What are the strategies you've adopted? What are the impacts that they've had? And it felt very managerial and very practical. And I should have realized that, seeing what was required, but it was still a shock. So I will just mention that. It's still worth doing. It's still a great sense of achievement, as I'll come back to at the end, but it wasn't the lovely, warm, fuzzy, reflective experience that I found writing a senior fellowship application to be. Okay, Ashley. So what I thought I would do is go through each of the 3 dimensions, so the 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 that Ros has already mentioned, and actually mention what I put as examples of how I could evidence these in my application. So this goes back to the question from Dunley from earlier on what she could put for individual evidence for her National Teaching Fellowship application. Okay, Ashley. So I should say that I got my principal fellowship 6 years ago now, where I was working at a different institution in a very different role. So, so for 4.1, it's sustained and effective strategic leadership with an extensive impact on learning, going beyond the institution. So, showing my age, the first thing I discussed was how I'd introduced a personal response system when I worked at Lancaster University. Now we tend not to use personal response systems and we use online voting, so I needed to make the analysis more up to date, but I'd introduced the use of a personal response system at Lancaster University, first in economics, and then we rolled it out across the university. I think I was the first academic economist to introduce a personal response system at that time. And this was picked up by the Economics Network and by other economics departments across the UK. And so I could immediately demonstrate impact beyond the institution. I also could demonstrate impact because I wrote a pedagogy article for the International Review of Economic Education on this as well. So this was the first, so there was a technology theme to what I was discussing in this part of my application. I then went on to talk about how I'd led on the establishment of a Bloomberg trading room when I was at the University of Huddersfield, and this was a faculty level initiative. I also talked about how I'd been involved in the piloting of lecture capture at Lancaster University, and how when I moved on to the University of Huddersfield, I led the university introduction on lecture capture. And this involved working with colleagues, it involved working with the union, and it involved working with students. So again, there was a technology example, but it's definitely got impact at university level. Again, part of my supporting evidence was that I had a pedagogy publication talking about the use of lecture capture. Again, on technology, I could point to being the academic lead on the virtual learning environment university level review at the University of Huddersfield and the outcomes of that. And then supporting the purchase of the initial personal response systems. I could talk about the extent to which I'd attracted grant funding for different technology innovations that I'd been involved in. So those are the examples that I used for 4.1. Okay, Ashley. So for 4.2, this is where I clearly struggled with my writing because I had to talk all about strategies and policies and procedures. So examples of this by Roz. We knew that we had to lose you. Thank you very much. Okay, so examples of what I put in my principal fellowship application for 4.2. Okay, Ashley. So here I talked about the management of the management roles I'd had within academia. So at Huddersfield, I was the faculty lead on teaching and learning. So I could talk about that. I was also the faculty head of the learning development group, which supported colleagues with their uses of innovations, including but not just technology innovations in teaching and assessment. I could talk about being the head of the economics group at Huddersfield, being a mentor to more junior academic colleagues. And then I could go on to talk about how I went on to become Deputy Dean of Aston Business School. And again, one of my direct responsibilities was teaching and learning within the business school and the policies I adopted. So I'd had these roles, but it wasn't the roles that were important. What was important was the input that I'd had into strategy and policy within these roles. So for example, I could talk about how I'd led on policy reviews that looked at expanding and providing information to colleagues on the variety of forms of assessment that colleagues could use, so they weren't just using an essay and a final exam, for example. I could talk about policy reviews on marking criteria, and I could also talk about programme reforms that I had led on. I'm very conscious that I've said to you, I did my application 6 years ago, and if I was going to live by what is expected of principal fellows, it shouldn't just be that I could tick all the boxes for being a principal fellow 6 years ago. I need to be able to demonstrate that there are still things that I am doing that would be relevant and that would contribute to principal fellowship now. So one thing that I thought, and linking back to Fabio's role at UEA at the moment, is that at Warwick, there is a body called the Warwick International Higher Education Academy, which is the equivalent of the UEA body that Fabio is leading. I'm a member of this Warwick body, and within that there are learning circles. And last year I was the co-lead for the Teaching Reward and Recognition Learning Circle. And as part of that, I led on developing the documents that would be used throughout the university for colleagues when they're thinking about going for promotion and what they'd put in their teaching profile of excellence document. I also led on producing the document that gives colleagues advice on what they can include if they're submitting a teaching focused study leave application. So there's just a couple of ideas of what I would put if I was putting an application together now. Okay, thank you, Ashley. So on to the third dimension of the principal fellowship applications. As Ross said, it's where we demonstrate an active commitment and integration of all dimensions of the framework and principal fellowship. So again, okay, Ashley? So what did I focus on here? Well, I've been working with the Economics Network for many years now. So to demonstrate a sustained active commitment to all dimensions, I focused on my role with the Economics Network over many years. As evidence of impact, I could highlight prizes that I got at university level and also at Economics Network level, so a national level. And I could also point to the pedagogy research that I hope I've got a sustained commitment to that I can demonstrate. I could also point to external examining and reviewing roles. So a lot of people on this call will have experience of external examining, but as well, institutions will often have 5 or 6 year strategic reviews, either of departments or faculties, or specifically of teaching within departments or faculties. And I've been an external reviewer for a number of those strategic reviews over the years. Okay, so key things to remember. Quite similar to National Teaching Fellowship applications, your Principal Fellowship application should be grounded in pedagogy. I've been able to highlight where I've written pedagogy papers myself. But not only that, we need to demonstrate how the strategies, the policies we've implemented are grounded in pedagogy literature beyond what we may have or may not have written ourselves. As I've mentioned already, counting and demonstrating the V's, the K's and the A's are very important. And as Roz said, quotations are important, not as important for National Teaching Fellowship applications, but short quotations from colleagues, from students, from people who can indicate impact beyond your institution or your department or faculty are very important. And the big thing always is impact. And it's not just what you've done, it's being able to demonstrate the impact that you've had beyond your department. So at the faculty level, at the institutional level, regionally and nationally. Okay, you've now discovered that I can talk a lot. Any quick questions? I'm looking at the chat. No? Okay. So I'll just finish by saying, I've mentioned already, I got a great sense of achievement from doing my Principal Fellowship, even though I found the writing of it incredibly hard. It was, again, as Fabio and Ros have already said, a nice opportunity to reflect. And as with National Teaching Fellowships, it does give you a distinguishing characteristic. And it may, we can't promise, but it is something that may help with promotions. And I know of at least one institution where having PFHEA or NTF was a promotion requirement. Okay, Parama, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to Ross and Fabio for setting that up perfectly well. And I have to say at the beginning that I can't beat Fabio's unicorns doing their thing. So you'll have to lower your expectations a little bit with that, or the drugs even. So you'll have to lower expectations a bit. I thought what I would say, because Caroline's gone through the descriptors and the criteria really, really well, was to perhaps talk about some of those principles that Roz also talked about, and go into a little more detail on my case studies, so my selection of case studies, and what kind of the difference between the SF and the PF level was. And I completely agree with Caroline that it's a step change. It's a different genre of things, really. So fellow to senior fellow is one kind of thing. It's kind of the next obvious step. Principal fellow is quite different. So let me just start with my kind of smallest in scope case study, just to sort of talk you through sort of the fact that Caroline said earlier, it's not just the thing, it's the impact as well. But then the key thing about the principal fellow is that there is a strategic element to it. You're not just doing a thing because it'll have an impact and be a good thing. There's a bigger sort of reason around why you're doing it. So my sort of smallest scope in scope case study was around my role as what used to be called an e-learning champion in my department in UCL. And what I talked about in that case study was kind of my journey from getting a grant from the HEA in the days that we used to get grants. I know Fabio was a recipient also a long time ago, and then they all stopped. I don't know what we did, but it wasn't us. But the idea there was this was back in 2012, which I think might have been the last year of those grants, to investigate audience response systems. So the kind of thing that Caroline was talking about as well. From there, so that was kind of within my class, big classes, obvious reasons for doing these. From that grew, once the grant ended, to a broader institution-wide review of, we're an institution that like this, with these constraints, is this a technological solution to some of the bigger issues that we have? From that, it grew into 4 in other forums, for example, that could be economics pedagogy forums, that could be other subject areas as well. When you have these particular issues, large classes, limited space, et cetera, how do you use audience response systems, perhaps integrated, as it was in my case, into lecture recording systems? How do you use these to sort of solve some of the problems that we face in higher education today, particularly in economics? So one of the reasons why I focused, this was a small part of that big story about the e-learning champion. One of the reasons that I talked about this was that economics and some other subjects are different from other subjects in smaller subjects in the UK HE sector, that we have very specific sort of constraints and challenges. And the reason for looking into this was to address this particular challenge. It started small, but it eventually grew into, as an institution, as a sector, because of the sort of issues that we have, how can we use these technologies, and this extended to digital assessment and so on and so forth, to put ourselves in a position where we can actually deal with some of the challenges thrown at us. So it very quickly went from my module to the faculty, to the institution, to sort of the sector, and doing sort of workshops for people who are thinking about these things externally, internationally, and so on. The strategic element was really, really important. This is not, I wasn't doing a thing because it's a thing to do. There's a very specific reason, there's a problem, trying to solve that problem in a strategic way, which can be replicated in other contexts as well. My other case studies were very, very different. And one of the things that I was trying to do is to bring out sort of different areas of activities. Areas of activities are another thing, to try to bring this whole strategic story together. So it's actually interesting that one of my case studies is about co-founding and directing CTEL, and we have 2 CTEL associates here. Hi, guys. And the other one was about directing CTEL's Economics for Foreign Policy Education, economics training for the British government. And again, hi, Annika, was a big role in this. So thank you to my 2 case studies who are kind of represented here as well. In both of these cases, the focus was not on what I did in terms of just delivering the thing. The focus was on strategically, why set up the center? What does it do? Who does it impact? What problem is it solving? Both sort of institutionally, but in a broader setup like that. Like Caroline was saying before doing the PFEHEA application, I wasn't quite used to thinking about impact in this kind of way. We're very much more used to thinking about individual impact, even when it's broader, but not in this kind of strategic way that there's this big problem that I'm trying to solve, which involves me to a certain extent, but it's not really about me. It's much bigger than that. My selection of case studies, there was a whole lot of different things, different areas that I could have selected. I got really, really good advice from our teaching and learning center, so UCL Arena Center. And they were, so that I could see there's a question about what does strategic mean. This is exactly what they helped me with, because I wasn't sure, like, is it about scope, scale? Is it about who I'm impacting, and so on and so forth. And what they really helped me with was to see, okay, so you can think about this in different ways. The easiest way might be in terms of the institutional strategy. That's like the most literal way to think about it. Institutionally, this is the education strategy. Here are the challenges. Here's where we're trying to go. Here is what I am doing addresses that. And you know, the impact bit of it is really, really important. Here's how what I'm doing is sort of furthering that, but I'm not sort of a passive sort of just deliverer of the strategy. I'm doing a little bit more than that's really, really important as well. The selection of the case studies was really important because, you know, Caroline's gone through the descriptors and the criterion already, making sure that I'm hitting all of those things, but it's not about quantity, it is about quality and depth. So which case study best really sort of presses the point on this particular part of the descriptor? So selecting those, I had other options, which I then dropped because yeah, it's a good one. I don't quite have the evidence in terms of, I have a little bit on the numbers, but I don't have the quotes perhaps, or I can't quite link it up to the institutional strategy that well. Obviously, institutional strategy, like I said, is one option, but then if you're thinking, you know, the Economics Network, for example, has a lot of projects that we're doing in the Royal Economic Society Education and Training Committee. Also, there's a lot of challenges that have come up, a lot of sort of sessions around here's this big issue that we have. And again, you can link up to that to say, you know, strategically as a profession, this is something we want to address. Here is what I am doing to help with that. The final thing that I think I wanted to touch on is if you look at the PFHEA form, there's I've forgotten what section this is. I think it's called section 3-ish. There's a weird numbering happening there about record of educational impact. There's case studies at the end. In a way, they're the easiest to deal with because you know what you did. It's just a matter of framing it. Then there's this element of educational impact. And I don't know about you guys, but I understand our sort of disciplinary language. Going into the guidance on the PFEHEA, I had no idea what these words meant. It's like, it's some, permutation of words, which, you know, individually, I know what they mean. Altogether, I have absolutely no idea what it means. So getting the guidance from our Teaching and Learning Center to say, all right, I'll start with something. I think this is what you mean by the record of educational impact. They would come back to me and say, too literal or too small in scope. Think about these questions. And then I go back and again, okay, think bigger. This is not a way that definitely me, but I think many of us are used to thinking, are used to sort of expressing ourselves, showing our impact. The other challenge that I faced was I felt like I was repeating myself. And definitely the advice I got was, you think you're saying the same inane, trite thing, but you're really not. And some part of this process is really bedding in. You know, these are the 3 or 4 things that I'm going in with. These are my big things to sort of hook my PFHE on. I keep bringing that back. You're thinking of it in a different way from an assessor who keeps wanting to see that thing. One of the words that I think Caroline brought this up before when she was talking about the framework, is sustained. So strategic leadership sustained. So it's not a collection of things that you've done. You can see the theme through this collection of things. There's a commonality and you're building on it. So that's why I gave the example of the e-learning champion before. It starts small and you're building on it, you're learning, and you're building with a purpose. It's not just to become bigger, it's because you're trying to solve this this problem. I'll just say one thing, and then I'm happy to answer any other questions also. I cannot tell you how much input I got from our ARENA center, so our teaching and learning center. There aren't a lot of PFHEAs at UCL. Everyone was kind of a unique case. There were no generalities. There are so few that there's little learning to be had. When I went into this, so I got mine in 2017 or 2018, I think. So Caroline, a little bit after yours. I've kind of blocked out the memory of that whole thing because it was so traumatic. I mean, after the fact, I thought, wow, okay, that was quite an achievement, like Caroline said. But during it, I was like, I have no idea. I can just, it's like a bingo card. I'll just throw in words, see what happens kind of thing. But then after it was really a learning experience for me to understand how sustained strategic leadership works as well. When I went up for professor, that process helped me tremendously. We don't have a requirement for PFHEA. I was told that it's seen in a very good light, like NTF would be as well. However, that process of thinking through, why did I do these things? What did I achieve by doing these things? That was incredibly helpful in that process as well. I'll say one thing and end there. When I was doing this, our teaching and learning center, they have an even better sort of resource now with examples. So most of us who got it, helped sort of shared our examples anonymously. When I was doing it, because it was so new, the examples were all from people who were so above the bar. I had no idea where the bar was. I mean, these were people who were changing the world. Of course, they're going to get it. But it doesn't help you to figure out, I know that's way above the bar. Where is the bar? What does it mean to be just above the bar? I think things are better now, and this is really great that the Economics Network at the RES has organized this. We didn't have this when we were going through this. And, all of the ones that I'd read were from other fields where they had different challenges. I'm sure, but you couldn't do the kinds of things they were doing within our context. So I didn't know what the equivalent was. We're in a better place. And I'm sure all of us who've been there, done that are happy to share.
Thank you very much, Parama. That's really helpful. And I'm so relieved that you said it seemed like a different language, because I agree completely. I said earlier that I recommend to colleagues applying for senior fellowship because I found that really rewarding. But I think one thing I would say is, because I agree with you so much about how it felt like a different language, I have recommended to some senior colleagues who I think would very easily reach the bar for applying for principal fellowship to apply for senior fellowship first, just as a way of getting used to that language. So thank you. Ashley, I think you're going to put us in breakout rooms. So for everybody here, the plan is we're going to go into breakout rooms, and it could be an NTF breakout room or a PFHEA breakout room. Then we will all come back together at the end of things that the reviewers would look for. So Fabio, over to you, and Ashley's going to work her magic with the slides again. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to, so of course, this is material that I'm presenting on behalf of Rob, so bear with me, but Rob has done an excellent job. So, and I see a lot of overlapping amongst what I've done and what Rob has done. And I want to say, I'm sorry that Rob is not here, but I got something personal about me and Rob. When I got awarded my NTF and the news went out in public, Rob immediately reached out and said, congratulations. And he told me about which other NTFs in economics we had in the profession. And this is what the NTF community is all about. It's just full of very nice people that are going to reach out immediately to you, and they're going to help you whatever you do. I mean, we are lucky that we also got the economics network and we have our own community, but the NTF is just going to get you out and about talking with other pedagogical expert in the sector. So if we move to the first slide. Reviewers are generally people who are awarded an NTF or a PFHEA. So in fact, people with a PFHEA, if they don't have an NTF, can train to become NTF reviewer. And I think what Robert wants to emphasize is that you got a selection process within your institution, and then you write your claim. Those claims are sent through anonymized, and they are then reviewed. So there is a scoring principles that look at the 3 different criteria, and then grades are aggregated up. And generally, you got 3 reviewers looking at application. It's a minimum of 2, but especially for when there are discrepancies, a third is brought into the picture. That is the way I remember that. And you're going to be given feedback on at the end of the process. Sorry, I meant to say the feedback is anonymized. You are not anonymized. Of course, you go with your own name, but the feedback is going to be anonymized. One thing to take into account, which is good or bad, depending on the situation, is that the same person is never going to review an application more than once. So if you're not successful and you go through the NTF selection process again, that person that reviewed you before will never see ever your application. So it's not like peer review submissions. It can be good if a reviewer really hates your application, they will never touch it again. But it can be bad if the opposite, they are quite supportive and they would like to actually see an improvement, they're not going to review the application anymore. Should we move to the tips in the next slide? So Rob is just making the point that, of course, you just want to place evidence in your claim, and so weaving in the evidence with the narrative of whatever you do. And I was emphasizing that you want evidence of particular different sources, but something that should never miss for any application to NTF is the student voice. And once again, be selective. It's just not enough to have students saying how fantastic, great, funny you are. Some quotes like that are good, of course, like my NTF claim opens with a quote from a student that say Fabio is amazing, just because it's something wow that, of course, you want to put at the beginning of your claim. Always start off with something wow that is going to grip the attention of the reviewer. But then you want quotes where actually students perhaps write something that is not so exciting, but they actually say, oh, wow, it really helped me developing skills that now I'm using in my own job right now. Or it was so compassionate that I was able to grow through this degree because he supported me as my advisor. Those are the things that evidence more impact to a certain extent. Should we move to the next slide? So Rob is emphasizing something that I was mentioning already. Excellence is the starting point. You must be excellent just to consider engaging into this process. But you really have to reflect on what that means for you and what makes you unique, and then how you evidence that excellence in terms of reach, value, and impact. So the criteria boxes are going to be there, but then it's up to you to make the case for the value, for the reach, and for the impact. By all means, don't feel that you have to tick all those 3 boxes for whatever you say, because your narrative is going to become impossible to read otherwise, and quite boring, frankly, So sometimes it's not that you need to explicitly mention it all the time, or you need to write it down for each of the activity that you promote, but most certainly there must be a good blend of value, reach, and impact in your claim overall. Of course, I was mentioning before, it is important that you mention the context within which you operate, so that reviewers are able to see, with respect to your context, how much you were able to reach out and to generate impact far away from your own competence area and out in the sector, or possibly in the whole world. Shall we move to the next slide, please? So the scoring system is really based on the evidence. The narrative allows reviewers to understand the evidence, basically, but then the evidence is what constitutes you know, it sets the decision for your own award. And I mean, if you need to become an NTF, you really need to score the maximum score, basically. It's just the way it works. In past reviews that I've seen, I didn't see the scoring given as feedback. The feedback is going to be just the narrative. So you're not going to be able to know how high you fared in terms of the scoring. That's going to be internal. So don't expect to see these grades on your feedback. But once again, every year there are small tweaks to the rules and regulations, so this might change in future. But yeah, you're probably not going to see this. The reviewer does. Should we move to the final slides? Robert wants to emphasize that, of course, this is competitive. There are just 55 places. So this means that very good applications that perhaps are at NTF level are left out every year. So it's particularly, it's really important that people prepare themselves to some bad news. And it can be quite emotional because the hype is so high and the whole institution is behind you, hoping that you're going to get this award, you know. So you might feel a bit of a burden on your shoulder when you actually go forward, and this doesn't materialize. And it's my job as still to sort of, you know, when news are coming out, I get informed along with the NTFs, you know, and just going patting shoulders and going for coffees with people and just making sure they are okay, because he is emotional. He's really emotional. But you know, the important thing is just reading the feedback, and especially, I mean, sometimes there are comments that really don't resonate with you, and my suggestion is ignore them. I had a referee the first time that I went through that basically said, "Oh, actually, you know, you speak so highly of yourself that it brings me to doubt that what you say is true," which personally I found really offensive, because I said, well, my institution is certifying that what I'm saying is true, you know. And I got a bit cross about that. But then I said, okay, I'm not going to care about this piece of feedback. It's unfair to me. But there were other two pieces of feedback that were fair. So somebody said, you talk about impact, but you don't talk about sustained impact. So you talk about what your students do now, but you don't say anything about your students in the future. So I went out there and outreached to students who were alumni for a very long time, even students that I had in the previous institution I was working for. And I asked them to give me some quotes about how they still remember me and I remember what I've done. So then I had this evidence of what I had done to them in the long term, you know, the kind of skills they got, or like the passion that they got in the long term. And that was really helpful to strengthen my claim, you know. So I took that on board, you know. It's particularly nice in the disgraceful event that you don't get an NTF, that when you start to see a pattern across the three pieces of feedback, and then you see, well, wow, this is really a sticking point. So of course, you know that that is something that you really need to do something about. As I said, I went and I was successful the second time through. It used to be quite difficult to see people going through the first time round, but now it's not as uncommon. I see more and more people. I have a colleague who actually went through 7 times before getting their award, and it was so deserved. I mean, I was happier for her award than mine, to be honest with you. Really deserved. And I have to say, I think that perhaps the problem that she had was that she was not blowing her trumpet the way she probably should have. And I don't know whether there was a gender component to that as well. I mean, we always know that there is this as well, but I would say, no matter the gender you are or at the stage are in your career, make sure that you actually have a critical friend who's going to tell you, very likely, you are much better than what you write about yourself, and you need to blow your own trumpet. It's extremely difficult to doing that by yourself. But yeah, generally the feedback, I have to say, despite that kind of accident that I had with my own feedback, is generally very positive, and I think the training got better and better, so that colleagues are actually able to provide constructive criticism, and they never put you in a negative light, But is that, it's important that people are honest and fair, because at least you can actually use this feedback for improvement. I think I touched upon everything that Rob wanted to say. I hope that I gave him justice with this little summary, but anything else, of course, I'm happy to address.
Thank you very much, Fabio. So we've got a few minutes left. Has anyone got any last minute questions? No? Okay, so it leaves me to say thank you very much to everybody for coming today. Ashley, thank you so much for looking after us so well and making sure that everything ran very smoothly. Thank you to Fabio, to Parama, to Ros, even though she's had to leave already. Good luck with your NTF and PFHE applications. I think the theme is that it's hard work, it might be painful, but it's worth it in the end.